She walked across the wide stretch of lawn, with its fine cedars, through a wrought iron gate in a brick wall mellow with age, and out into the formal garden. There was a raised terrace that ran along the whole rear of the stately house, and it was reached by a flight of steps at the top of which, on each side, was a weather-beaten Italian statue on a pedestal. The garden, rich with the gay flowers of late August, extended from the terrace to a low iron fence that separated it from the great park and prevented the cattle that grazed there from wandering in. She was a young woman with pale brown hair and dark brown eyes, slim and tall, and with that virginal look that many English women strangely retain after years of marriage. She had a straight nose, with delicate nostrils, a candid brow, and a well-shaped mouth. The red of her painted lips made her clear white skin look even whiter. In her quiet, almost demure way, she was a very pretty woman, but since there was nothing striking in her appearance, since she dressed very simply, it was not till you talked to her that you were aware of it. Because she was shy, she gave many people the impression that she was cold or casual, but the most censorious dowagers in the county admitted in their ponderous, old-fashioned way that though she might be a trifle offhand, she was a gentlewoman. It offended them a little that she was obviously quite indifferent to their opinion of her. Without rank, a naval officer's daughter, and without a penny of her own, she had the unassuming distinction of a well-bred woman who is aware without arrogance of her place in society and makes no claim to be other than what she is. Her thoughts troubled her, and her face had been grave as she walked across the lawn, but a faint smile softened her brown eyes as she saw her mother-in-law, Mrs. Henderson, sitting on the terrace. The table was laid out for tea. A butler and a couple of footmen were in the act of bringing out from the house the urn and the teapot, plates of bread and butter, scones and cake. Mrs. Henderson was reading a novel, but she put it down as her daughter-in-law joined her. "Haven't you been playing, May?" she asked. "No. I felt lazy. They're just finishing a set, and then they're coming along." From the terrace you could hear the voices of the players as they called the score and the ping of the ball against the taut gut of the racket. "You're looking rather washed out, dear. Do you think the heat's too much for you?" asked Mrs. Henderson. May faintly colored under Mrs. Henderson's kindly but shrewd eye. "Oh no, I'll play after tea. I dare say that Roger'll be glad to have a game." Roger was her eldest son and May's husband. He had arrived from abroad the night before and had telephoned that morning to say that he would drive down in the course of the day. It was Mrs. Henderson's birthday, her 53rd, and according to their habit all the family were assembled. There were her two younger sons, Jim, who was still at Oxford, and Tommy, who was only 13 and home from school, and there were her daughter Jane and her daughter's husband Ian Foster. And of course there was her own husband, the General. Mrs. Henderson had a suspicion that sometimes they didn't find it altogether convenient to come from wherever they might be to spend her birthday with her, especially as it was on the last day of August, and there was grouse to be shot on the Yorkshire moors. But she liked to have them there, round her, on that one day of the year, and though they might come when they would have preferred to be elsewhere only to please her, she knew that they made the sacrifice willingly. She accepted it as a proof of their love for her. It was her only selfishness. Roger was a soldier in the military intelligence, and for the last 3 or 4 years had been much out of England. He had been in Japan and in the United States, and during the last 12 months, since Munich, he had been in Spain and the Balkans, several times to France, and now was just back from Poland. Mrs. Henderson had given up hope that he would be able to spend this birthday with her, and it was with joyful surprise that she had heard his voice on the telephone that morning. His arrival would make her happiness complete. She was glad for May's sake too. May hadn't seen much of him of late. It was a pity she had no children. "Here's Jane," said Mrs. Henderson, with her ready smile. Jane Foster came through the gateway, up the steps onto the terrace, and sank into a chair. It was odd that Mrs. Henderson should have such a daughter. Mrs. Henderson was a tall, handsome, gray-haired woman, with fine features that gave her a somewhat severe look, but with mild, friendly eyes. She was dressed in black. But Jane wore bright green slacks and a green and yellow tunic with a bold geometrical pattern. On her feet were yellow sandals with enormously thick cork soles. From each sandal protruded a scarlet toenail. She was 34, Mrs. Henderson's eldest child, a tall, rather gaunt, rather masculine, rather horsey woman. Her naturally dark hair was henna'd, and she was as heavily made up as an actress about to face the footlights. The obvious desire of that big-featured woman to look alluring would have been pathetic if its grotesqueness hadn't been disarming. She was a joke, and you couldn't but believe that she knew it, and saw the fun of it. And to add to the fantastic quality of her appearance, she wore in her left eye a rimless monocle without a cord. The dowagers who have just been mentioned were agreed that if you didn't know all about her, you would have said she was dreadfully common. Little escaped the sharp eye behind the monocle, and being perfectly aware of this, she took care to give these ladies ample cause for their remarks. "It's funny," they said plaintively, "that men seem to like her." It was mortifying that at a dinner party when the men, having finished their port, came into the drawing-room they should gather round Jane and shout with coarse laughter, while she aired her views on things in general with a freedom of speech unusual in county society. And her father and mother were such nice people. Mrs. Henderson, when she took in the details of Jane's turnout, raised her eyebrows. "My poor Jane, are you obliged to make up quite so much on a summer afternoon in the depths of the country?" "I feel so funny if I haven't got my face on," answered Jane, taking out her lipstick and painting lips that were already heavily painted. "You wouldn't look so funny if you hadn't." Jane gave a deep throaty laugh. "Darling, how sweet you are to me, but I love you just the same." Mrs. Henderson wasn't devoid of a sense of humor. "You're so vulgar. The neighbors can't help thinking there must have been a little nonsense between me and one of the gamekeepers, and that isn't very nice for me, as I was only 19 when you were born." "And was there, mother?" Mrs. Henderson and May burst out laughing. "You fool, Jane." Mrs. Henderson ladled spoonfuls of tea into the teapot and poured hot water in. "They won't be long, will they? Who's playing?" "Father and Tommy are playing against Dick Murray and Dora." "Why doesn't Jim come along then, and have his tea?" "Why indeed? You don't suppose he could tear himself away when Dora's on the court?" "Don't be so silly, Jane," said Mrs. Henderson a trifle tartly. Jane secured her glass more firmly in her eye. "Darling, you don't miss much. I know I can never get away with anything with you. I don't know if Dora's in love with Jim, but I know Jim's so much in love with her he can't see straight. And you know it too." Mrs. Henderson stirred the tea leaves while her daughter and her daughter-in-law looked at her curiously. She gave her shoulders a faint shrug. "He's only 21, poor lamb. He'll forget her when he goes back to Oxford. You wouldn't like it very much if he went off and married a foreigner, would you?" "Even foreigners are human, darling," said Mrs. Henderson, with what for her was considerable acidity. "I've noticed that's something we English are apt to forget." Jane sat up in her chair. "Do you mean to say you wouldn't mind?" For a moment Mrs. Henderson was silent, and when she spoke it was more as if she were speaking to herself than answering Jane. "She's pretty and she's intelligent. I'm terribly sorry for her. She's alone in the world. She hasn't a home and she hasn't a country. And that nightmare of her father having been done to death in a concentration camp. Still, she is a German. If war breaks out, you won't be able to keep her here. Your father says there won't be a war. He says he knows it for a fact that when it comes to the point Hitler will climb down. Father would hate Jim to marry Dora." Mrs. Henderson looked with her mild eyes from Jane to May, and then from May to Jane. "I wonder. May has been married for 8 years, and she hasn't any children. You haven't either, Jane. What do you suggest I should do about it? Get a new chauffeur?" Jane asked. Mrs. Henderson, going on with her thoughts, took no notice of the flippant remark. "We've had this place for 200 years. It's the pride of your father's heart. I don't think he'd mind much whom Jim married, if only there were children to carry on. She gave a glance at the noble faade of the great house, and then her eyes traveled over the formal garden with its Italian fountain, its statues, its grass paths and many-colored flowers, till they rested on the park beyond. There were trees there as old as the house. Under the shade of a huge oak cows were lying. As far as the eye could reach, it was Henderson land. It kept them poor to maintain that vast house and that great estate. But they loved their home, she and her husband, and there was hardly a tenant who didn't farm the land that his father and grandfather and great-grandfather hadn't farmed before him. They were prepared to sacrifice themselves to hand down to their successors intact the house and land that they held in trust. Jane was about to speak when she saw the general stroll through the wrought iron gate. "Here they are," she said. General Henderson was a tall man, slim and erect, with a lined, bronzed face and white hair, whom you could never have taken for anything but a soldier. Even in tennis things he managed to look well groomed, and you might have guessed that he was fussy about his clothes. His manner was brisk and authoritative, but you couldn't know him long without discovering that this was, as it were, a professional veneer, and that at heart he was a kindly, easygoing man. He was brave and honest, but he had the narrowness of his caste and calling, and he had common sense rather than intelligence. He could more easily forgive an injury than a social solecism. You could rely on him to the death, but you couldn't always rely on him to do the wise thing. He walked up to the terrace accompanied by his two sons, and a moment later Ian Foster, Jane's husband, appeared with Dick Murray, the general's agent. Between them was the girl of whom Mrs. Henderson and her daughter had been speaking. Dora Friedberg was 20. She had very fair hair and large blue intelligent eyes and a honey-colored skin. She was slender but with full breasts, and her elegant little head was set proudly on a lovely neck. Notwithstanding the blonde and healthy radiance of her youth, there was in the firmness of her chin, in the decision of her mouth, and the singular repose in her eyes when she was not speaking, something that suggested a strong will. Jane, who had taken an instinctive dislike to her, had told her husband, "I wouldn't trust her a yard. She'd be a demon, that girl, if she was roused." But Jane was wrong in saying that Dora was German. She was Austrian. The Hendersons had met her at Kitzbühel in the Austrian Tyrol during the winter that preceded the Anschluss. She was staying with her mother at the same hotel as they were. Frau Friedberg was a woman of distinguished appearance, and Mrs. Henderson, who was not indifferent to such things, was not surprised to learn that she was of good family. She spoke little of her husband, a lawyer, and Mrs. Henderson guessed that he was of a class inferior to her own. It was likely enough that after the ruin of Austria, she had been glad to marry any man who offered her security. The two boys, Jim and Tommy, took a fancy to the pretty, lively girl, and Jim went on long excursions with her. She was a beautiful skier. A year later she wrote to Mrs. Henderson to say that her father had died in a concentration camp, and she wanted to come to England to get work. She didn't mind what it was, and she asked Mrs. Henderson to help her to find something. Mrs. Henderson, full of pity, after consulting the general, wrote back asking Dora to stay with them while they looked about. But it wasn't easy to get a job for an Austrian refugee just then. Dora could cook and was quite willing to go into domestic service, but the Hendersons didn't like the idea of it, and they thought, moreover, that in such a situation her beauty must inevitably expose her to unpleasantness. They begged her to wait till something turned up that was suitable to her education and culture. While she waited, she made herself useful. The general was a justice of the peace and chairman of the local county council, and Mrs. Henderson, much occupied with good works, was on a number of committees. They found it very convenient to have at hand a willing and intelligent secretary. With Jim at Oxford and Tommy at school, they were alone for months at a time, and the presence of that charming girl brought life to the great, stately house. It was the general's suggestion that she should stay with them indefinitely. She accepted it with a gratitude that touched them. The Hendersons had taken her out of the kindness that was natural to them, but before long they looked upon her with real affection. She became one of the family. In Mrs. Henderson's heart, she took the place of the two daughters who had come between Roger and Jim, and whose death in childhood she still mourned. Mrs. Henderson began to pour out tea. "How did you play, Tommy?" she smilingly asked the untidy, tousle-haired little boy who was her youngest son, when he sat down at the tea table. "Like a foot," he answered in his treble voice. "We only just beat them." "If you'd been on your game we shouldn't have had a look in, I suppose," said Dick Murray with a grin. "All right, pull my leg." He stretched out a thin arm and took a big piece of cake. "Bread and butter first, darling," said his mother. "What a life," he piped. "I thought in the holidays I was supposed to have a little happiness." He carefully examined the plate and chose the smallest piece he could find. "You have a rotten life, old boy, don't you?" the General smiled. Mrs. Henderson gave her son a glance of tender amusement. He was by years the youngest of her children, and she doted on him. There was in his skinny legs and arms, in that slender body, and in that smooth, funny little face of his something that wrung her heartstrings. She felt she must be constantly on her guard not to spoil him. But he was growing so fast, he seemed so frail, and he was never still, busy from morning till night with one thing and another, that sometimes she was afraid. She didn't know what she would do if anything happened to him. When Dick Murray had come onto the terrace with the others, he took a quick look round, and then moved as if to sit down in the vacant chair next to May. But she gave him a glance, and it may be that it bore a message, for he changed his mind and seated himself by Mrs. Henderson. Jane, puffing a cigarette, noticed it. She looked at him thoughtfully. A fellow of not unpleasing appearance. He was young, 4 or 5 years younger than herself, but his hair, thick and wavy, was prematurely gray, and this, with his tanned, unlined skin, was peculiarly attractive. It made his fine blue eyes look even bluer than they were and his lashes darker. His features weren't particularly good, rather blunt, but when he smiled he showed a set of very white, regular teeth. He was somewhat heavily built, with broad shoulders, and of no more than average height. There was a charming twinkle in his blue eyes, and on his face a look of great good humor. Everybody liked him. He had so much vitality, it warmed you to be with him. And if there was something aggressively animal about him, it was so healthy, it was combined with so much friendliness and simplicity of nature, that it was not offensive, but only invigorating. A wonderful lover, I should think, reflected Jane. With a sardonic smile on her painted lips, she now turned her gaze on her husband. Ian Foster sank his huge bulk into a wrought-tan chair, and it creaked under his 200 pounds. He was a huge, red-faced man, with a great booming voice, and his obesity was a disgrace. He took his handkerchief and wiped his brow. "I don't know why you should be hot," Jane said to him tartly. "You haven't been playing." They all ran about so strenuously it made the sweat drip off me just to look at them. "It's given me such a thirst that unless I have a whiskey and soda, I shall pass out." "You'll drink tea, Ian," his wife said firmly. "And if you'd run about a bit more yourself you might get a little of that horrible fat off you." "What was it that Solomon said about a nagging woman?" "Nothing," Jane retorted. "He said a virtuous wife is above rubies. Considering that you've been flagrantly unfaithful to me for years, I fail to see how that applies to you, Jane. What did you expect when you married a glamour girl?" "Idiots," said Mrs. Henderson, enveloping them both with her affectionate smile. They were accustomed to hearing Ian and Jane say outrageous things to one another. They sparred all day long, and when one got a rise out of the other, he chortled with glee. No one knew better than Mrs. Henderson how deeply Jane loved that corpulent, gross, loquacious man, and how devoted he was to the plain, gawky creature who by some strange freak of nature was her daughter. Though he was constantly flying into a passion with her, when he would abuse her in language of incredible violence, he was entirely dependent upon her, and without her was lost. To him she was the grandest woman in the world, the most amusing and the cleverest and the truest. They were comics, both of them, and theirs was a perfect marriage. The general looked at his watch. "Where the devil's that scoundrel Roger?" he asked. "He ought to be here by now." "He won't be long," answered Mrs. Henderson. "His secretary phoned from the War Office 2 hours ago to say he was just starting." "You'll be glad to see him, May, won't you?" said Jane. May flushed a little. "Naturally," she smiled. "After 5 months. I suppose he'll bring all the latest news," said Dora. It was the first time she had spoken. She had a pleasant voice and only a trace of a German accent. The general turned to her with a kindly smile on his thin, weather-beaten face. "Take my word for it, Dora. You've got nothing to be alarmed about. There's not going to be a war. Chamberlain will keep us out of it, as he kept us out last year." "It'll be a bit awkward for you if there's a war, won't it, Jim?" asked Jane. He looked at her coolly. "Not at all. You're still a pacifist, aren't you?" The general looked down with a slight frown, and Mrs. Henderson gave her daughter a glance of annoyance. Jim's views were a subject that she sought to keep out of the conversation. Jim and his father had already had several arguments upon it, and they had said things to one another that would have been better left unsaid. Why couldn't they understand that he was a boy, only 21, and it was natural at his age to have extravagant opinions? He would change them when he grew older and learnt something about life. His pacifism was like his communism, merely an expression of the natural idealism of youth. Why, you only had to look at him. He was as tall as his father, broad-shouldered and well set up, with a nice-looking sensitive face, more sensitive than Roger's, but with the same family likeness. There was nothing mawkish or abnormal about him. Indeed, he was a high-spirited, manly youth. Though a fine athlete who rode for his college and had played golf for his university, he was a hard worker. He was the only one of her children who cared for books for their own sake. Roger was a great reader too, but he only read what immediately concerned his job. He had a one-track mind. Jim was a boy of wide interests, and even making allowances for a mother's partiality, Mrs. Henderson felt herself justified in cherishing high hopes for his future. He had done well at school, he was doing well at Oxford. He was a good speaker and was going to be a lawyer. There was no knowing to what eminence he might not rise. But of course he must be sensible. Mrs. Henderson wanted to hear what answer Jim would make to Jane's deliberately provocative question. He turned to her gravely. He spoke not with truculence, but with a firmness that was impressive. He looked Jane straight in the eyes. "Yes, I'm still a pacifist. War settles nothing. It's not only an iniquitous business, but a stupid business. There are a lot of us at Oxford, and if there's a war we shall refuse to fight." "You say that now, old boy," Ian broke in, with a tolerant grin on his fat red face. "But if war breaks out you'll change your mind all right. Heaven knows, I don't want war, but if it does come I'm going to be in on it." "Don't be so silly, Ian," cried Jane. "You're too old to fight and much too fat." "Will you oblige me by keeping your trap shut, darling?" he retorted. Mrs. Henderson's eyes wandered past the formal garden to the park beyond. The late sun bathed it in a golden beauty. The trees, the gnarled oak trees with their dark foliage, the lush green of the meadowland, and the sheen of the lake, oh, it was lovely. Not a breath of wind stirred the leaves. It gave you the impression of such perfect, such heavenly tranquility that you felt it must last forever. You had a singular feeling that the moment would never pass. The cows lying under the oak trees never rise to their feet, and the night never come. Time, as though tired of his restless wandering, stood still. Mrs. Henderson gave a faint sigh. "When I went down to the village this morning with everyone so happy and friendly and contented, and when I look at that peaceful scene with all of you here, I can't bring myself to believe that there's even a possibility of war." But Jim still held Jane fixed with his serious eyes. "Are there any more questions you want to ask me?" he said. "No, there aren't," said Mrs. Henderson sharply. Let me have at least this one day without an argument." Dick Murray, with his good nature and ready tact, threw a casual remark into a conversation that was on the point of losing its amenity. "Lucky Roger was able to make it, Mrs. Henderson. It would have been a disappointment to you if he hadn't got back in time. It would. It's dreadfully sentimental and old-fashioned of me, but I'm bound to admit it. It means a great deal to me to have my family round me on my birthday." "Let's hope Roger won't be so damned secretive as he usually is," said Ian. "Well, he's a sleuth, isn't he?" Tommy piped in. "If you're a sleuth, you've jolly well got to be secretive." "I wish I could get into the intelligence department," Ian went on. "It's just the sort of job that would suit me." "What in heaven's name makes you think that, Ian?" Jane cried, fixing him with her monocle. "They want brains for that, my boy, brains." He gave a great guffaw. She had given him an opening, and he promptly took it. "I suppose you think if I'd had a spark of intelligence I wouldn't have married you, and I'm not sure that you're not damned well right." But before Jane could think of a crushing retort, Mrs. Henderson gave a cry. "Roger!" He was standing in front of one of the open French windows that led from the great hall of the house on to the terrace. He had come in as quietly as was his habit, and was watching them with an amused smile. He came forward, and taking his mother in his arms, kissed her warmly. Tommy jumped up and flung his arms round him. "You're not too old to kiss yet, are you, old boy?" said Roger, giving him a fond embrace. Then he turned to his wife. She had risen on seeing him, and put her hand to her heart, as though to stay its beating. Her pale face had gone paler still. When he kissed her, she slightly turned her mouth away, so that his lips only touched her cheek. "Hello, May. You're looking grand. Have a nice journey, Roger?" she asked. "Not so bad. A bit bumpy." He greeted the rest of them, and then his eyes fell on a stranger. "This is Dora Friedberg," said Mrs. Henderson. "I forgot. You haven't been down here since she's been living with us. She's been a great help. May wrote and said you had a friend staying with you." "The General and Mrs. Henderson have been wonderfully kind to me," said Dora with a little smile. "Nonsense, my dear," said the General. "I don't know what we should have done without you in this great barn with no one but my wife and me to live in it." Roger turned back to his mother and fished out of his pocket a small box. "I've brought you a present from Warsaw, darling. Many happy returns." He kissed her again. It was an antique brooch, and Mrs. Henderson, flushing with pleasure, put it on. Roger was her eldest and best-loved son. He was the heir to the property. She looked at him now as he drank his tea and ate cake, talking the while easily, and thought with pride that he was a fine figure of a man. He too was tall, broad-shouldered and well-knit, but his face was stronger than his father's or Jim's. There was decision, even sternness in his well-marked features, and his eyes were keen and observant. Now and then they rested for an instant on Dora, and Mrs. Henderson knew he was taking her measure. When he had done eating, she asked whether he wouldn't like to go and put on something cooler, for he was wearing a blue serge suit. "You and May have got your usual rooms. I don't mind giving you a tennis lesson after you've changed," said Tommy with a grin. "That's awfully good of you, old boy," smiled Roger. "I'm afraid I can't stay, Mother. I must get back to town after dinner." "Oh, Roger. I didn't want to miss your birthday altogether, darling, but I'm up to my eyes in work at the War Office." The General pushed back his chair and rose to his feet. "Come into the library with me, Roger," he said. "I want to have a chat." "Oh, George, he wants to talk to May," said Mrs. Henderson. "He hasn't seen her for so long. Let me have him for half an hour, May." "You shall have him for as long as you like after that." "Of course," she answered. When the General and Roger had left them, Dick Murray got up and announced that he must go. "Aren't you going to play any more tennis?" cried Tommy. "I'm afraid I can't. I've got a job to do in the village." "You might take a note for me," said May. "I'll go and get it. I'll bring it out to your car." She went into the house. Dick was at the wheel when she came out of the front door with an envelope in her hand. "You look awfully white, dear," he said in a low voice as she gave it to him. I'm nervous, that's only natural. I wish I could be with you. I must do it alone. There was a troubled look on his good-natured sunburnt face, and his fine blue eyes, with their dark lashes, were harassed. She smiled. Don't look so worried. I shall manage. You'd better be going. As he started the car, he glanced at the envelope she had given him. He saw his own name scribbled on it. When he got out of the park gates, he stopped the car and opened the letter. There was a sheet of note paper inside, and on it, written in pencil, only 3 words. I love you. May went to her room. She wanted to collect herself. She wanted to be sure that she would say exactly what she had made up her mind to say. A shiver ran down her spine, and her heart seemed to miss a beat as she considered the ordeal before her. But she was determined to go through with it. At last she heard Roger come into the adjoining room. May, he called. I'm here. He came in. I was looking for you. Sit down, will you? I want to have a talk with you. That suits me, he answered cheerily. Gosh, it's good to be home again. Mother's looking grand, isn't she? And Tommy's shooting up. He'll be as tall as Jim when he's full grown. She looked at him steadily, though her heart now was beating fast. Her throat was dry. It was awful to be so scared. The only thing was to set her teeth and make a dash at it. She knew Roger well enough to be aware that it was useless to beat about the bush. Roger, I want you to let me divorce you. May, he cried. He stared at her with horrified bewilderment. Please don't speak. I want you to listen to me. You've always been kind to me. I've got no fault to find with you. It's just that I can't go on like this any longer. I'm so terribly lonely. His eyes were suddenly distressed. My dear, I'm not blaming you for that. I know it isn't your fault. I know I'm away a great deal. I'd take you with me if I could, but I can't. It's a very peculiar job I've got, and I must be completely on my own. I realize that. You must know that I love you, May. She gave him a faint, derisive smile. The worst was over now, and she had her nerves under control. I think you really do in your way. But it's not a way that brings me much happiness. You love me as you love an old suit of clothes, because you feel comfortable in it. You like to think of me sitting in the flat, all ready to welcome you when you come back from one of your hush-hush jobs. He moved uncomfortably in his chair. You make me sound horribly selfish. She shook her head. Heaven knows you're not that. I know that your work is important, and that you're very good at it. It's just my bad luck that there's no place for me in your life, but just to sit and wait. That's what I've been doing for years now, waiting. I'm tired of it. He made an odd little movement of his hands, and then clasped them together. It was as though he were distraught, but were unwilling to betray himself. May noticed it and thought bitterly how well that instinctive repressed gesture revealed their married life. She looked at him sadly. Has it occurred to you that after being married to you 8 years, I'm still rather frightened of you? Oh, May, what a terrible thing to say, he cried. It's a fact. Don't you think it's rather pitiful? You see, I don't know you. I only know the side of you you've chosen to show me. I'm not sure that there isn't another side of you that's hard and ruthless. He looked away quickly, as though there were something in his soul that he did not want her to see. You don't seem able ever to let yourself go. You're incapable of intimacy. He looked back to her now, and there was a good-humored smile on his lips. Aren't you being rather melodramatic, my dear? I've always looked upon myself as a very simple sort of chap. I try to do my duty, and I want to do my job as well as I can. And your job is the most important thing in your life, isn't it? More important far than me. Need I answer that question? He chuckled. I'd like you to. I wouldn't think much of a chap who let his love for his wife hamper him in the performance of his duty. Would you have me otherwise? She sighed. I had no idea that you weren't just as happy as I was, he went on. If you hadn't been so absorbed in your work, you'd have noticed long ago that something was wrong. You can't expect me to chuck my work. Of course not. Then what do you want me to do? There's nothing you can do. I want to live. I want to be happy. I'm 28, Roger. If I don't make a break now it'll be too late. She could see that he was deeply distressed and it hurt her to pain him, but at the same time she felt that he thought her unreasonable. He didn't understand. He gave her a searching look and she colored. Are you in love with somebody else? Yes. He hesitated a moment. His eyes seemed to try to pierce her inmost soul. Do you mind telling me who it is? Dick Murray. Dick. His utter surprise was obvious in his face and tone. Evidently Dick was the last person in the world whom he would have expected her to have any feeling for. Is he in love with you? Yes. He was silent for a while. She knew that he hated scenes, and she knew how great was his self-control. He would have been ashamed to show emotion. He took out a cigarette and deliberately lit it. Some fellows have all the luck, he said at last. He's got nothing in the world to do except make himself pleasant. The acidity in his tone made her flush, and she was on the point of giving him a sharp answer. But she restrained herself. She was determined not to get angry. It would be horrible if they began to say cruel and bitter things to one another. She forced a little smile to her lips. He's the best agent your father ever had. He's the only one who ever made the estate pay. He's a very good agent. I knew that. That's why I got him the job. It was her turn now to give him a searching look. He's not my lover, you know. It never occurred to me that he was. I may not know you very well, darling, but at least I know that you'd never be able to do anything underhand. Dick wouldn't either. It's not our fault, Roger. We didn't want to fall in love. We couldn't help ourselves. He owes everything to you. He knows he's let you down. He's a very good chap, and he has a lot of charm. You've been thrown together a great deal. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised if you've come to care for him. I know he isn't as intelligent as you are. You've got a brilliant future before you. He's so cozy, Roger. I'm not up to your mark, really. Dick and I speak the same language. How do you imagine you would live if you were married to him? He could hardly stay on here as my father's agent. He could get another job. Have you any idea how hard jobs are to get now? That's our lookout. We want to be married as soon as you'll give me my freedom. He got up and began to walk up and down the room. He was thinking deeply. He stopped in front of her chair. It'll be an awful blow for my father and mother. I can't imagine anything they'd hate more. Your people have always been very kind to me, but I should be a fool if I didn't know I've been a disappointment to them. Your father wanted me so awfully to have a son. When they've got over the shock, honestly they won't mind very much. They'll think you'll marry again and have better luck next time. You've got it all settled, haven't you? I've been thinking of nothing else for weeks. And supposing I come to the conclusion that this is only a passing infatuation and refuse to let myself be divorced, I should go and live with Dick and force you to divorce me. She saw him frown and she almost smiled, for she knew very well what he was thinking. The mere idea of the scandal such a step would cause gave him goose flesh. But when he spoke it was to give her a shock that she had never anticipated. I think I should tell you that the Germans are marching into Poland tomorrow, and we shall be at war in 24 hours. She gave a horrified cry. I didn't say anything about it. I thought you'd all know soon enough, and I wanted dear mother to enjoy her birthday. Dick is in the territorials. He'll be called up at once. It's going to be a long and terrible war. No one can tell what's going to happen to any of us. Oh, how awful. Dick may be killed or I may be killed. This isn't the time to think of oneself. The French are unprepared and we're unprepared. The Germans will go all out to snatch a quick victory. We shall all be in it, every man and woman in the country. May tried to control herself, but she couldn't. She began to cry. He put his hand gently on her shoulder. It may be that I haven't been a very good husband. Poor May. I want you to be happy. But don't you think this is a moment when we should forget our private interests? I am going to ask you for your own sake, for all our sakes, to wait till after the war. Then if you're still of the same mind, I promise I'll do everything I can to give you your liberty as quickly as possible." She sighed deeply. She was shattered. "Very well, Roger. I'll wait. You know, darling, you'll have to do your bit like everyone else. I shall be thankful to help. You might stow it away in the back of your mind that I love you very much and shall always love you, and there's nothing in the world I want more than your happiness." "Except winning the war," she smiled ironically. "Except that, yes," he answered gravely. And with that answer, she saw that he wasn't thinking of her anymore. They sat in silence. "Hadn't you better go and see your mother?" she said at last. "If you're going back tonight after dinner, you won't have another chance of talking to her." "Yes, I suppose I had." He roused himself unwillingly from his reflections and rose to his feet. He looked at May for an instant. His eyes were cold and his lips thin. She knew what he was thinking. He was impatient that just then she had introduced into his life a complication that might be a distraction from the pressing affairs he had to deal with. It wasn't her fault. If he had only told her before that war was inevitable, she wouldn't have spoken. She would at least have waited to see what happened. She sighed. She supposed it was unreasonable to expect that in such a terrible crisis her happiness should seem of any particular importance to him. And of course, her happiness wasn't of any importance to anyone but herself and Dick. Roger walked towards the door, but as he was about to open it, turned back. He gave a light laugh, and when he spoke it was in the bright, cheery way in which he was accustomed to speak. At that moment it positively startled her. "Oh, I almost forgot. I brought you a little present from Warsaw, too. As soon as I saw it, I knew it was just the sort of thing you'd like." He took out of his pocket a small parcel wrapped in tissue paper, and undoing it handed her a long gold chain of curious workmanship. "Unless I've been done in the eye, it's an old one." "It's lovely," said May as he handed it to her. And it was. It was either Polish or Russian. May was charmed with its delicate beauty and touched that he should have gone to the trouble of picking out something that was so much to her taste. But at the same time she was grievously embarrassed. It seemed shocking to accept a present from him after what had just passed between them. "I can't take it, Roger," she cried miserably. "Why on earth not? Of course you must take it. It's much too good for Jane, and I practically snatched it away from the French ambassador's wife. She was crazy to get it. Don't be a fool, May." He spoke with such good nature, with such a breezy friendliness, that she did not know what to say. She flushed deeply. "Thank you very much. It's wonderfully kind of you, Roger. That's a good girl." There was an ironical twinkle in his eyes as he nodded and walked out. May looked at the door he had closed behind him, as though she could see him stalking along the passage to his mother's room. She knew that his manner, almost jaunty at the last, had changed the moment he withdrew from her sight, and that his face wore once more the stern, vigilant mien that it always wore when he thought no one was looking at him. But whether he thought of her as he went or of the war that was imminent she could not guess. What she knew was that when he entered his mother's sitting room there would be no trace that he was anxious or troubled, and she would find him as ever sweet, sympathetic, and tenderly affectionate. May sighed. She sank into a chair, and her eyes stared vacantly out of the open window. She had never really understood him. He was a strange, subtle man. Was he deceitful? No, it wouldn't be fair to call him that. It wasn't an act that he had been putting on when with so much pleasant friendliness he had given her the necklace she still held in her hands. He had always liked to give her presents, and he had felt all he seemed to feel. His breezy, chaffing, light manner was natural to him. It inspired confidence because it was genuine, and yet it was only a rind that covered the active, calculating wariness within. He was wrapped up in his work, and when he met people he judged them according to the use they might be to its furtherance. Even when he seemed to be gaily immersed in social pleasures, she knew that at the back of his mind he was turning over the tortuous schemes he was always concocting. She sometimes felt that the only pure delight he ever experienced was that of triumph when he had circumvented the scheme of one of Britain's possible enemies, or discovered some crafty plan that might be to the country's disadvantage. Of course his motives were patriotic. No one could have a more passionate love for England than he, but she had an inkling that there was something in his nature, pitiless and rather dreadful, that made him take a peculiar pleasure in his secret work. Because his motives were pure, he allowed himself to revel in the crooked ways in which, setting his wits against theirs, he strove to combat the wiles of his adversaries. It was a game he played of which the stakes were the safety and liberty of England, and he found it so absorbing that he could not stop to consider the feelings of others. It was true what she had said, there was no room in his life for her. May smiled bitterly when she thought that she had once imagined that she loved him. Now that she knew what love was, she realized only too clearly that it was not love that had induced her to marry him. That had come about so naturally that she could not blame herself. Her father was killed in the last war, and her mother was left with little more than a pension to support her. She had been a school friend of Mrs. Henderson's, and when May's mother was widowed, the Hendersons had offered her one of the cottages in the village. It was only a mile away from Graveney Holt, and the two families saw one another constantly. From a very early age, May had known that her mother and Rogers had set their hearts on her marrying him. They both attached a great deal of importance to family, and May's parents, though poor, were what is known as well-connected. And Mrs. Henderson was too disinterested to care that her prospective daughter-in-law was penniless. Roger grew into a tall, good-looking boy, and when he came home for the holidays, first from school and then from Sandhurst, she conceived a girlish enthusiasm for him. They were like brother and sister together. A greater familiarity existed between them then, strangely enough, than ever did after they were married. She worshipped him as his mother worshipped him, but she knew now that there was no love in her feeling for him. It was a schoolgirl's infatuation for a boy, a young man, 5 years older than herself. Mrs. Henderson had always been fond of her, and she was pleased with the girl's admiration for the son of whom she was so proud. She treated her as though it were understood that she was the future mistress of the house. She took pains to instill into May her own feeling for the noble pile. She made her love its beauties. She taught her to appreciate treasured pieces of furniture, and told her the stories of the ancestors whose portraits hung on the walls. She filled her with her own dismay when economic difficulties forced the general to sell the Filipino Lippi and the Goya. It could not be expected that a young girl should not be dazzled by the slightly faded splendor that surrounded her when she came up to the great house from the modest cottage in the village. It seemed like her real home, and she could not refrain from planning what she would do when she became its mistress. Nor could she be insensible to the general feeling in the county that it had been settled long ago that she would marry Roger. There were in the neighborhood mothers with daughters who were inclined to think that Roger could do better than marry the penniless girl of a deceased naval officer. But since it looked as though there were nothing to do about it, they decided to take a romantic view of the situation. Sometimes May wondered what Roger thought of it. He was easy and friendly. He made her fetch and carry for him when he was a boy. He played tennis and golf with her when she grew older. He danced with her. He chaffed her playfully. But he never gave any sign that he was aware of the plans his mother and hers had made for their future. Then her mother died. It was a terrible grief to her, and she didn't know how she could have borne it if Mrs. Henderson hadn't been so wonderfully kind to her. May had nothing now but her pension as an officer's daughter. She was 19, and she wanted to earn her own living. She had a good figure, and the first thing that occurred to her was that she might become a mannequin. But Mrs. Henderson would not hear of it. Jane was married by then, and Mrs. Henderson was insistent that she should live with them until her own marriage. It was then that for the first time she came out into the open with the scheme that had before been only vaguely presupposed. She told May that she had always loved her as a daughter, and that it was her dearest wish, as it had been her mother's, that she and Roger should marry. May was too open to pretend to a surprise she did not feel. I should be a perfect fool if I hadn't known that you and Mama had settled that when I was 4 and Roger was 9. You like Roger, don't you? Of course I do. Ever since I could walk, I've thought him wonderful. Then what is to prevent you from getting married as soon as possible? Only Roger. We must let him have a say in the matter, poor brute. Oh, but Roger's devoted to you. He's never said so. I suppose he thought you knew. Men are apt to take so much for granted. There are limits. You would marry him if he asked you, wouldn't you? Of course I would. May flushed. But darling, you must promise me you won't suggest it to him. I couldn't bear to think he was marrying me just to please you. Mrs. Henderson smiled. My dear, has it never occurred to you that you're exceptionally pretty? You only want a little more color to be a raving beauty. You must promise me that. I understand. It's very natural. I promise you I'll never say a word to Roger. I think he's much too clever not to see that if he doesn't snap you up quickly, somebody else will. She looked at May tenderly. I'd sooner give my son to you than to anyone in the world. I know how good you are, and I know you're no fool. You're sweet-tempered and you're a lady, and I'm old-fashioned enough to think that important. Sooner or later Roger will come into the property, and if I'm still alive it will be a comfort to me to think that I can safely deliver the place into your hands. Oh, darling, don't let us count our chickens before they're hatched. I've had a happy life, and I want nothing now but a grandson to dandle on my knee. You must have beautiful children, my pretty. May, young though she was then, knew very well how intense was the desire of the General and Mrs. Henderson to see the succession to the estate assured.